Hey guys, it's LS, and this is a solo queue patch 6.3 tier list. None of the things mentioned in this tier list is going to be necessarily pertaining to LCS or Challenger Series, and there's some things that you should know when watching this video. First off, if you see a red exclamation mark on the champion's icon, then it means that they're bordering on the tier below. If you see a yellow exclamation mark on that champion's icon, it means that I strongly believe that the champion is capable of being inside of that tier, but either not enough people can play it at that level, or it might be currently misunderstood or still in the unknown. If a champion isn't listed, then I'm personally of the opinion that it's a sub-ideal pick for a player of that assumed skill level, or alternatively, it could just be a champion that it's extremely difficult to judge where you can accurately place it. Okay, so going into this video, you're going to have S tier, A tier, and B tier. S tier is going to contain champions that are likely going to produce the best results that you can assume to have inside of that tier, assuming that you are a player worthy of that MMR. A tier is going to be champions that can still exist, and they are still a relatively safe pick and viable pick inside of that bracket. And then B tier is going to be champions that they can exist, but more so only if you are adept at playing them. But they're not so bad that they would be excluded out of the equation and just be not listed entirely on the list. Lastly, before I begin talking about champions, I want to state for the record that no champions that you see listed under individual tiers are for improving. They're solely for what you could expect by picking those champions relative to other champions that will probably be picked, or the level of players that you will go up against inside of those tiers, and what picking that champion will probably enable you to do. By doing this, you can assume that by picking certain champions that you may see listed in the S tier or A tier is probably going to produce a higher positive win rate for you in the long run than picking other champions, relative to the opponents that you're playing against. So without not really talking about anything though, I'm just going to do a quick rundown. So what you're looking at right now is bronze. The standout picks are definitely going to be Yorick and Malzahar. I totally recommend picking them up and seeing how you do with them. Both of them are giant lane bullies and likely to put the opponent on tilt. You can probably work on a lot of other areas of your gameplay while playing them, and they're probably going to give you a very positive result if you've dedicated even just a few games to playing them. Other champions that might stand out in the B tier is going to be Mordekaiser. A lot of people think that he is just an AD carry. I disagree. I think he can be played mid lane and top lane, and I think that he's extremely undervalued, and people really ignore how strong his W is in lane after they change it to be able to be self-cast. In silver, now that you're looking at silver, you'll notice that Trundle joins the fray in top lane, as well as Vladimir. Vladimir could have been placed at a bronze tier in top lane, but I don't think that it's really necessary. Vladimir also joins the fray in mid lane. This is because Vladimir at certain points can have a semi-difficult laning phase if you're not managing your E properly early on before he gets enough spell vamp. So rather than have to waste your time managing that inside of the lower tiers, you can instead just do it here now and expect really high results, whereas before he was just an A tier pick. For silver, there's not too much of a difference from bronze. Basically, you'll notice that a few champions were added and they're not too difficult or too complex to learn. I totally recommend picking them up because their kit is not too hard to do, and again, they're pretty good and they're going to reap you a lot of rewards if you just take a few games to learn how to play them. The only standouts are probably going to be Trundle, who you might notice he gets played a lot by professionals lately, and then on top of that, in mid lane and A tier, you'll notice that you have Swain now as an option. Swain has a really durable laning phase. He is quite a lane bully, and he's really difficult to abuse because usually you need teamwork to bring him down, and you need good timed ignites or properly used Merlinomicons. The other person that is now joining the fray in B tier is going to be Annie in top lane, and before she was more so of an A tier and bronze, but now that players are starting to learn how to abuse some things a little bit more, and the average skill level is going up a little bit, I think that Annie can end up encountering some difficulty when she's trying to go for some CS or combos, and players are probably likely to be a little bit more aggressively prone to trades and counters and whatever. So that's pretty much it for silver. Finally, we're looking at gold now, and one thing that you might notice is that the champion pool widens up a little bit, and you do have more champions to pick from. Some champions that weren't even anywhere close to other champions kits are now being listed now, and that's because you can now begin to diversify yourself, and there is more viable picks relative to the champions kits, which are still going to produce a very high positive result for you if you end up taking, again, just a few games to learn them. Heimerdinger joins the fray in top lane, and that is probably going to be one of the most abstract standout picks, and he also joins the fray in mid lane. The reason that he's a little bit lower in top lane than he is in mid lane is because he still does have the ability to get abused in top lane if you're not placing your turrets correctly, whereas in mid lane he's a little bit more safe because of how close he is to his tower at all times. Other than that, nothing really stands out too much, except for the fact that you can begin to play Evelynn if you really want to, although I don't recommend it, which is why you see a red icon over her. It's basically because while she can produce really good results for you, she can also backfire because she is an extremely complex champion when it comes to the mental aspect of League. Now moving on to Platinum, you'll start noticing some more meta picks or some picks that maybe you've seen in recent months. This is because now players are starting to become a little bit more aware of their own mechanics and a little bit aware of their own game knowledge. And so because of that, you want to start beginning to pick champions that you can control at a relatively okay level that are still going to produce you really high results relative to the other players. You don't want to have to be worrying about if you can hit the Zed Shurikens or if you can do the Insect on Lee Sin. You don't want to be worrying about if you're using your Quinn ultimate correctly or if you're hitting your Destiny and Gates on Twisted Fate. Instead, you really just want to be able to play solid champions and make use of macro and micro plays that you've been honing over the last few months, years, whatever. And in doing so, you're probably going to end up crushing a lot of people that are trying to play too fancy champions that are outside of their ability right now. You don't need to be playing the meta champions yet. That's going to come in time and ultimately when you move on to Diamond, Master, and Challenger. If you want to win right now, you're looking at an extremely clean list of champions that you can pick from that you're probably going to see extremely nice results with. Now that we're moving on to Diamond, I do want to say that this list is Diamond up until around Diamond 2, Diamond 1, and Diamond 2, Diamond 1 basically shares a list with Masters. So getting that out of the way, what you will begin to notice is now there's a lot more meta picks coming into play. And this is because at this level, you do need to start playing champions that are not super cookie cutter. It doesn't mean that you can't play those champions because obviously there are players that exist that play Amumu to Challenger, people that play Teemo to Challenger, people that play Fiddlesticks to Challenger. But basically, if you want to have an extremely high chance of just bulldozing through your opponents, this again is a list that is probably going to do that for you. You'll notice that none of the champions here are too complex, and if they are beginning to, dance around being complex, they're usually in the lower tiers in A or B tier. But still, the A tier is basic, simple champions that are still high impact and enable you to have a lot of control over the mid game. Now that we're moving on to Master tier, this is where players are starting to get pretty serious. And usually a lot of people that are playing inside of this tier take League a little serious or they've played it a really long time. Inside of this tier, you are going to have to begin to start playing the picks that you do see getting played by pros often. What you're seeing here, though, is the picks that you can realistically expect to be able to have high impact on the games early, mid, and late. None of the champions here are still outside of the realm of possibility, and you'll notice that still, even some of the more complex champions, such as Zed and LeBlanc, are still a little risky to play here because it's not going to be so often that everyone can pilot them. On top of that, Heimerdinger in Master tier now joins with a red exclamation mark because he does get a little bit more difficult to learn how to manage and play. You'll notice that Gragas comes back into the mix because of the changes that recently happened to him. I think actually just skyrockets him right back into being a viable pick. Quinn, while being an extremely powerful pick, I don't think is able to be controlled that well, and I think that you're more likely to have positive results by picking other champions. But then again, if you're Master tier, your pick availability is going to be a lot wider, as you can see. So feel free to look at these champions and pick what suits you and take a look at where it stands relative to what you can probably expect. Finally, we're moving on to Challenger. And really, I don't want to talk about almost anything in this tier other than a few things because it's just way too much to talk about. Some of the picks that you're going to see that are really weird. Callista with a yellow exclamation mark. The reason that she has a yellow exclamation mark is because not everyone can play her. Even if you try to play her and you spend a lot of time devoting to her, it's still going to be relatively difficult. I think top lane Callista is something that's going to come into play and into meta in maybe the next few months. Or it might not, it might just completely flop. She's extremely powerful with engaged junglers or really proactive junglers. So that's probably a combo that you can expect to see. And if you look at some of the solo queue accounts of some pro players across some of their regions, you'll notice that it's beginning to get picked up. Another thing is Shaco. A lot of players probably think, why is Shaco on this list at all? Shaco is probably one of the most complex champions inside of League, and he has the ability to bust the game wide open, unlike probably any other champion in the game. Yes, including Twisted Fate and including Evelynn. I will go more in depth on him later during the streamed video, which is going to, again, discuss all the champions really in depth. Rounding out the list, you'll notice that you see all the familiar faces in mid lane. LeBlanc's here, Syndra, Talon, Zed, Victor. Although you'll notice that some of the much more complex champions such as Jhin and Twisted Fate and Zillion are reserved with a yellow exclamation mark because while I firmly believe that they can exist here and they are worthy of being an S tier pick, it does take a certain player to be able to pilot them. In the AD carry role, you'll notice that Ezreal, Kalista, and Kog'Maw also have yellow icons, and that's for the same exact reason. Not everyone can really play these champions, even when they devote a lot of time to it, and that's because these champions are really difficult to use at this level of play, but if you can use it, they certainly belong up there alongside the others. In the A tier, you'll notice that Galio is in the fray, and then on top of that, Mordekaiser as well, and Shen. I'm not of the opinion that Shen is a bad pick. I think Shen is really broken, but I think he's really misunderstood. I wanted to place him higher, but I can't be so sure about doing so when you look at the other champions that he has to go up against consistently. Another champion that may look really out of tune is Akali. There have been some players that have been able to play Akali at a relatively high elo in China and Korea. I think that if anyone is able to make a champion work at a really high elo against some of the best players in the world, then it deserves to be looked at. And with the recent buffs that she received, I think she's more than capable of being an A tier pick that can certainly exist if you take the time to really learn her. Everything else basically has the same exact reasoning. And so if you want to know more about the challenger list, then tune into the stream or check out the video of the stream once it comes out. So okay guys, that about wraps up the tier list, and I hope that you guys all enjoyed that. The image to the tier list will be posted in the description below on the YouTube video, so you can check it out there. And then on top of that, again, I will be doing another video, which will be live streamed. I will put the date in the description below of when I will live stream it, where I will go over every single pick here, and then I will upload that again to YouTube. I think that this tier list, again, is meant for everyone. You shouldn't be playing, again, champions that you shouldn't be having to worry about. You don't need to worry about playing Zed, Lee Sin, etc. at the lower MMRs. And then on top of that, I think that this realistically gives an image of what you can expect when playing those champions at the MMRs that you see them listed at. So if you don't see the champion on the list, again, either it was way too difficult to judge, or I just don't think that you're going to see a lot of positive results by playing it, unless again, you're maybe like a one-trick pony. So I hope you all enjoyed the video, and make sure to check out the second video if you're really curious about why some of the champions are here. Thanks a lot, bye!